if my character ain't right, it's going to say something to them. And I might be the only like true representation of what a Christian and what Jesus is like to these kids.
Yeah. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Journey podcast. We're so excited that you're able to listen to this conversation today. I have a special guest, Esther Brunat. What's up, girl? How you doing?
Hi, guys.
So excited that you were able to make it here today. We have a cool conversation to talk about. You work in the public school systems, right?
Yes, I do.
Let's go. How many years have you been working?
I'm in the middle of my 12th year.
12 years. 12 years.
12 years. The first 3 years were not in public school, though. They were in a small Christian school overseas. But it has so 9 years in the public school system.
Wow. And what grade do you teach?
I teach high school, all of them, 9 through 12.
Math, right?
Math and leadership.
Oh my goodness. Leadership.
Yes, I've taught leadership for the last 2 years and I'm teaching it this year.
What does leadership look like? I've never taken a high school class on leadership. I feel like they're coming up with new classes.
No, this is great actually. So every school, I think legally has to have some kind of student government.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm the student government advisor.
Okay, let's go.
And so we actually have a class that coincides with that. So if you're in student government, if you're in the exec board, like officers or whatever, you have to take the class, right? Mm-hmm. And so I get to have that class of kids, and then I convinced my administration to let me start a level 1 class that any kid in the school can take, right?
Oh, wow.
And so I have 2 leadership level 1 classes, and then I have an upper level leadership class.
Yeah.
There's actually a whole like standards for them, like things that they're supposed to be able to do by the end of the school year, whatever, different things that they did. So it's really fun though, because although we have a lot of tasks to do, I just was talking about this the other day on Instagram. We have so many tasks to do, and you can get drowned up in the tasks and stuff like that. But tasks don't build leaders, right? It just builds doers. And so when I first took the job, I realized that pretty quickly in the first year, that if I wasn't being intentional about building their character, that we were just going to get lost in the to-dos and stuff like that. And so now that I take that part of my job way more seriously, I love the fact that is what I get to do.
That's awesome.
We talk about character, leadership building. We reflect a lot. I think my class is actually the
best one in the whole school.
Yes. By the time you graduate, every kid should take leadership.
That's amazing. And I was doing some research, and there is 98,000 public schools.
It's a pretty big number.
98,000 public schools. Let me make sure I get this right. And there's 49 million students just in the United States. And so there's so much importance, and I'm glad I brought this and brought you onto this podcast. There's so much importance to representing Christ within different environments that you work in. And you work in the school system, and a lot has been changing within the school system and stuff like that. And you work in a public environment. So tell us a little bit, first of all, what was your passion to wanting to teach, and then we'll kind of get into more things. Okay,
so as anybody who's young trying to figure out what you're going to do when you study college, whatever, I was a business major my freshman year of college, and then I failed accounting.
Look at that.
Right?
Look at that.
The irony of that I became a math teacher after that, but I failed accounting, and I started reflecting about my life. I was like, do you really want to sit in an office? Is that really what you're going to do? And so I had that on one side, and then at our church, I was really involved in the youth group and stuff like that. Grew up in our youth group, and then, became a youth leader. And I spent so many summers at stinking summer camp, and I loved it.
Yeah.
Being a counselor, all that
That's
kind of
awesome.
stuff. And so all I knew was I really enjoyed being with teenagers, and I really felt like there was a grace there for me.
Yeah.
And so I was like, man, how could I be with teenagers I guess I'll be a teacher, And what's funny is that like accounting, I suck at accounting. I still, when I'm trying to nickel and dime and balance the checkbook, I'm like, am I doing this right? But give me an algebra equation and I got you.
Let's go.
So, and the school I was at Broward College, and they had just released like 4-year degrees, and one of them was in math. And I was like, well, this sounds too good to be true, because they paid me to go to school.
Oh, really?
I graduated 100% debt free. I graduated richer than I started, let's say that, because of all the scholarships that I got. So it was just perfect timing. And so that's kind of how.
That's amazing. So it all like from what you're saying, it all sparked from being around church and in the youth ministry and counseling and helping people and stuff like that.
And I'll say that to this day, like you can, my students right now, some of the kids who are in my math classes, so my leadership students are like the kids who spend a lot of time with me, and then I have my math students and my leadership students are looking at my rosters of my math classes. They're like, Miss Brunat, that class isn't giving you trouble. We know that kid from middle school. Da, 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 da. And it really is like, I don't know, I call myself a teenage whisperer. Like kids, like I just connect, like they all get along with me. Like I don't have any trouble
I'd be looking on your social media and I'm like, these kids love you.
They do.
This was not my high school. My high school, like everyone's like having a lot of fun in your classroom, and I'm like,
it's just a thing.
Esther's the teacher everybody wants.
It's true. Kids literally walk in my class and they're like, I know I'm gonna have a good time here. And I'm like, you need to follow some rules though.
That's awesome. You got to get your work done.
Right.
So
work hard, play hard.
So tell me a little bit, how do you now, in the public school system, how do you combine your faith in that type of setting?
That is a journey that I don't think ever ends. Like I don't think you ever really figure that out, right? So like I said, my first 3 years I was at a small Christian school, and so that's very much living in a bubble, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody's here for the same reasons. You talk about your faith openly.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about their beliefs or whatever. And so when I moved back home and pivoted to public school, it was like fine. I was a math teacher, and so that still didn't really challenge it. It's become more challenged now that I'm a leadership teacher, because as the student government,
you can't be behind the scenes anymore.
I cannot be behind the scenes. I used to have a classroom upstairs in a corner building. No one ever knew where I was. No one ever came to visit there. Now everybody on campus knows who I am. Yep. I'm in charge of so much. Even if I wanted to be in the background, I couldn't be in the background and so that also makes it so that the kids have more of an intimate relationship with me. The ones who are in my upper level class, they spend so much time with me. Like we're about to go to South Carolina, like in a few weeks.
Oh, wow.
Like 3 nights, 4 days, we're
That's
driving
amazing.
in a rent. You know what I'm saying? Like they spend so much time with me. And so I wrestle, I shouldn't say I wrestle a lot. But there is a wrestling there to be like, Lord, am I doing this the right way? Did I make this decision the way that you would have made this decision? Did I represent you well in the way that I spoke to this kid? In the way that I navigated this tough new law or this tough new circumstance that we're going through. And so that's honestly, in the last 2.5, 3 years, has become more of a present idea at the forefront of my mind.
Yeah.
And then you just think about, our beliefs and the world is like completely different from where we are right now as Christians.
Yeah. What was not okay 10 years ago has become okay now.
Right. And like out in the open and whatever. And so I want to make sure that I'm always loving the kids well, but we also don't want our love to make it seem like I'm giving permission.
And you're saying it's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's the line right now that I'm like, Lord, you gotta do something.
Yeah.
Because that's been the hard part, for sure.
Yeah.
And then personally, is really like, because my kids know, like, they make fun of me all the time. They're like, Miss Brunat, are you going to church?
Are you going to church?
Right. They make this joke. They call it, my serial killer trait is that I don't listen to music, which is just a true fact about me. Like, I will drive in the car silently to Orlando, like, and they make fun of me all the time. And they're like, but I bet you would put on some church music. I'm like, why are y'all roasting me about this?
You're not wrong.
It's true though, right? Like, and so, because they know, I know that they know that about me, right? Kids,
and that's a good thing.
Right, absolutely.
They know where you stand and
Absolutely.
where your beliefs are.
And so I think about that because, if my character ain't right, you know, it's gonna say something to them. And I might be the only like true representation of what a Christian and what Jesus is like to these kids.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I humble myself so often because I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
Like, let's be clear. Like,
And nobody is.
no, I yelled at a kid the other day, like, and I went back to apologize to her because I was like, Esther, although the kid did something that, you know, was annoying, that you didn't need to yell at her like that in that way, you know? And so to humble myself and be like, yo, that's my bad. I should not have talked to you in that way. I could have said that same thing to you in a different tone and much nicer.
And I think that's awesome that you are self-aware enough to recognize those type of moments.
Yeah.
Where you're realizing, okay, I might be the only representation of Christ to these kids. And so how do you like that? And that's always probably the ongoing, you know, struggle of being into the public school system is, all right, I have to do my job. I have to sometimes say yes to some things that the school is saying yes to.
Right.
I might not believe it, but I still need to show that who I am and my representation of Christ's love and grace and mercy to these kids as well. That's amazing.
Right. And so that does take a lot of self-reflection, and it takes a lot of humility, and sitting at the feet of Jesus and being like, you got to have this for me because I don't know that I got it right now. You know, and knowing that there's grace for that too.
And it's those extra grace required people.
Oh man, tell me about it.
I know my teachers back in high school needed extra grace for me, so I can't imagine how it is being a teacher and
in 2023
and meeting all those extra grace required. You know,
I was actually looking at a kid and I'm just like, do you just want to be miserable? Like, it's not me. Like,
I'm not doing a thing.
Like, the first day of school, a kid walks in like 10 minutes late or something like that. And like I said, like, we have a good time in my class, but I got a few rules. One of them is you got to put your cell phone away. I don't care. Like, you know, I'm like, okay, put your cell phone in the basket. He's like, I'm not doing that. I'm like, okay. Like,
this is my classroom.
Right. You know, and so for me, like, in that split second, I have to realize, right? It's 7:40 in the morning. You walked in here mad. You just saw me for the first time, you know? Whatever's going on over here don't got nothing to do with me, actually. And so I think a lot of times, just in general, like in the classroom, but also in general, sometimes you look at a situation like that and you take it personally, right? You're like, oh, why are they defying me? Why are they giving me attitude? He just walked in my class at 7:40 in the morning. It can't be about me. Something must have happened on the way to school
or something like that.
Home, you know.
And that's the other thing. You don't really understand. Like, sometimes you never know what these kids are going through behind the scenes.
No, you do not. I had another kid walk in yesterday, actually. So when you're late at my school, you get a receipt essentially that says like the date and the time that you came in so that your teacher will let you in the class, right? And so after a certain amount, you get a detention and then you start getting all that kind of stuff.
I was always late, so I know what those I know what those are like. I think my senior year I had like the record for most tardies.
Right.
I got so many detentions just because of tardies. It wasn't even because of my behavior.
Right.
It's just because I was late. I was like, this was the worst decision. Why did I get a car? I'm not waking up. I'm not going. Like,
that's what my question was gonna be. How are you getting to school?
I was driving myself. That's why I was late. I'm like, oh, there's 10 minutes left. I better head to school.
Oh my gosh. So I'm looking at this kid walks into my class with a CVS receipt. It's long.
A CVS receipt.
Okay, it's long.
That's so
I'm
funny.
like, my guy, we only been here a month. Like, what is this? And then it dawned on me. I was like, this can't be this kid's fault. So I asked him. I said, hey, how do you get to school? He's like, my mom. I was like, she works, doesn't she? And he's like, yeah, overnight.
Oh.
So she's getting off work
and
picking up, yes,
taking them to school.
and taking him to school. Wow. And so it's like, yo, you really can't give every situation a blanket response, you know? And that really is like the discernment of the Holy Spirit, like to be like, maybe let's pry into this moment and give it a little different grace than what I would have regularly given it, you know? Because there's another kid who walk in my class late all the time, and I'm like, such and such, I'm not going to say your name. I know you've been here since 7:15.
If they're listening to this, you know who you are.
You know? And so it's like you really do have to weigh it and give certain situations grace and certain situations not grace. And it's like, and all that stuff is being watched.
Yeah.
You know? And all that stuff in turn is also then testimony, right? To lay good ground for what the Lord might do in somebody's life later.
That's good.
And we all just get to be part of that little journey.
So has there ever been a moment in the public school system where it kind of challenged your beliefs?
Absolutely. I definitely think all of what's going on in our society with sexuality right now really challenges different things.
You know, it's crazy. When I was doing my research on some of the public school and what are teenagers like most passionate about, it was some of those areas that are like arising within the country that they become passionate about for it now. And you're like, oh my goodness, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, they probably weren't even thinking about these things.
No, I think Gen Z is probably the most passionate generation I've taught. I'm only taught 2, so and I love that though, because I think empathy is a superpower. So I definitely think that there's good in that, and that's beautiful. And as the Lord refines that, it's going to become a huge strength. I also think that zeal can be dangerous sometimes, you know, especially if you're not really sure what you're fighting for. And you're just fighting just to fight.
Just to get your mouth out there and say something.
Exactly. And so they're so woke that they just say all types of things. And so making sure, like I said earlier, you want to fight for what is right, but also not make something be permissible all at the same time. And so I am challenged in that love aspect. I'm challenged in that, hey, you said something off color to a kid because of X, Y, and Z. I want to make sure I defend that kid's personhood,
that's
right? Good. But not condone
what they're doing.
Yes.
That's good.
And that I find my wrestle in that a lot. And so that's been one of the biggest things for me, is that the way that it's challenged my faith. Politics in general, because public school is so political at the end of the day, challenges my faith, you know, and what is right, what is wrong, what side should I lean on? Should I be public about that? You know, that's really wrestled. Like,
those moments of wrestling with should I be vocal or not in those moments,
you know, and I will admit that I've been guilty of being like, there's been ways in which I have been vocal that I do feel like, Esther, maybe if you pulled back a little bit more and applied a little bit more grace to that situation, maybe you would have handled it differently, you know? And so those are the two things that I would say for sure.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, tell us a little bit. Maybe some of the listeners on here, they're working in a non-Christian environment. Ministry doesn't necessarily. It doesn't mean it happens in the four walls of the church.
Right.
Ministry can happen anywhere you're at, and whatever place that you're in.
Right.
God gives you those giftings to work in that type of area and the grace to work with those types of people. You know what I'm saying? So what would your advice be to some people on how they can represent Christ in their workplace?
I definitely think character is a huge one. So one of the things, I think this is like surface level. Character is like the easy thing to do. And so in my particular workplace, I have struggled with people who don't know how to Matthew 18. Like if they have an issue with me, they're talking behind my back about it, or they're being conniving in some way. And so I don't know if it's refreshing to them, but but to me, I'm just going to call you and be like, hey, what's your issue?
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people are not used to people being adults and be like, oh, you just.
Yeah, being upfront.
Yeah, I don't like having to do that, but what I don't like even more is that you're talking about me behind my back, and I feel like I need to triage and tell that person this and tell that. No, I'm just going to go talk to you and like ask you what the issue is. Yeah. And then I find that once I do that, people are like, oh, maybe I shouldn't really be talking about Esther, or she didn't really do anything. You know what I'm saying?
And what happens a lot of times is when people go and start telling other people, the whole story just gets, misinterpreted, and it's, now that person's talking about it, but they really don't know the true intentions of the person that is actually in the situation.
Exactly.
So now there's just so much going on.
Yeah, it's snowballing.
Yeah.
And why are we doing that? So I think character is surface level. Excuse me. One of the things I had asked the Lord for when I left Panama, because it was such a bubble, and I loved the bubble. I think the bubble has its place for sure. I think Christian education is such a special form of discipleship and really awesome. So let me say that. But I had asked the Lord, okay, Lord, now I want to be more of a light outside. That was an intentional prayer that I prayed before I left. And it's been, 9 years later or whatever. And I have, lived my life as a Christian the kids know, but I really want my students to have like encounters with Jesus, because I know what he's done for my life, right?
And you know what he can do for theirs.
Yes. Yeah. And so in the last year, I have been asking the Lord just differently to show up through me in the classroom. And I think as Christians, because the Lord gives us, our spiritual gifts, I just don't think there's not a lot of, how do I say this? I am personally growing right now in my own personal spiritual gifts and learning to hear the voice of the Lord profoundly, So let me say that, right? And so, words of knowledge, prophecy, all that kind of stuff, right, is like I'm asking the Lord for, And so now I find myself asking that for my students because I'm like, Lord, if you show up in the classroom.
So you're interceding behind the scenes for these children.
And this kid gets a word straight from the heart of God about them, and they find out that there's a God in heaven who knows them intimately, and there is a Jesus who cares about their life and wants and died for their sins. I think there's no doubt that kid, even if they don't walk away that moment accepting the Lord,
it's a seed.
Oh man, and they're taking that with them. One time, my teacher, she has said, and they'll know. So I find myself in that space right now, and just asking for it. Like instead of waiting and being like, well, maybe one day an opportunity will present itself. Maybe I could be a little bit more active and a little less passive about, wanting those moments to happen. So that's where I'm personally at right now.
I think that is so good because sometimes we ask God, oh Lord, like I'm being put into this position. I'm being put into this workplace that is a worldly environment,
right?
And then we don't be aware of those moments that God's opening doors for us to plant seeds.
Right.
And I think that is one of the biggest things when it, like, obviously you know a lot more experience in working in a worldly environment more than I do because I work in a church. But I think that's just an awareness for every single person, is that God's constantly putting people in your way. And I'm even like sometimes trying to be more aware because I travel so much. I'm like, okay, God, like I need to be more productive when it comes to the mission of what you've called me to do, to go and meet people where they are at. Right. And so now it's like, okay, where am I? What environments am I in that is not a Christian environment? Okay, I'm in the plane a lot, sitting next to people that, so I'll be in the plane sometimes, just be like, Lord, like I'll just feel like a tug on my heart that God's kind of like, okay, I want you to kind of, even if it's just like a normal conversation, but kind of just, show love, show grace, and just share your story with other people and different things like that. And I wear that's why I like wearing my logo a lot when I'm traveling, because it says Messengers of Hope. And so I wear that logo, and a lot of people just ask me like, oh, like what hope are you sharing? And it's like, thanks for asking, because I'm about to tell you. I'd love to tell you about Jesus Christ. But I think the greatest thing is just being aware of moments that God is trying to place in front of you in those environments.
Awareness, man. I think it's Jacob. I might be getting this wrong. Somebody cross-reference me, where he's wrestling with God, and then he says, "Man, surely the Lord was here, and I knew it not." Because it's not that the Lord isn't, he's everywhere, right? But stepping into that awareness that like, oh, shoot, you're here.
Yes.
And I love that you said that. It's true. We could all be more aware that God is trying to do something at all times.
And the truth, we are the lights in the dark world. So when we step into dark environments,
there you go.
God isn't not present no more because we stepped into a darker place.
Right.
No, he's there simply because we decided to walk with him in those moments.
Because we carry the kingdom with us.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, Esther, I want to say thank you so much for just being on this podcast.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being on the Journey podcast. It was great to just talk about, your journey and your passion for being in the public school system. And I really think this encouraged some people that are working in not Christian environments, and they have to struggle with some of those, some of those things that, faith, and people that aren't living in faith, those people that they have to deal with that need extra grace. So thank you, Esther, so much for being on this podcast. Hey, if you are listening, go ahead, share this podcast with a friend or a family member. I'm sure that it's going to bless them. But we can't wait to see you next week. Next Friday, it's going to be a new episode, a new guest, and we're going to be ready to just share other people's stories with you. So thank you for joining this week's episode. We will see you next week.